When we got in our position in Beerville, after a lot of heavy enemy shelling and so on, I went around to check my company position in the night, middle of the night, and I found I didn't have any officers left.
We had some 19 or so killed in the next couple of days around there, and they were buried. You couldn't bury them in the polder because it was too wet. You go down 6 inches and you're in the water. So they had to bury them on the side of the dike.
There was quite a problem in keeping up our reinforcements. They were very slow coming, and the ones that did come had little or no infantry training. So it was quite stressful in that respect.
And I was keeping a low profile, down low, and all of a sudden there was a shot, and I just threw myself down. I started looking and see, then I saw there was blood running down my battle dress, and my hand was hurting all of a sudden. So I took stock, and I found that a bullet had gone through my left hand and creased my right leg. So they sent me home on what they call a tri-wound scheme. You've been wounded 3 times, they said you're out.
But anyway, we progressed, and eventually, well, as I said, by the end of I guess the 3rd or 4th November, it was pretty well over, and the last place to take out was Connaught Heist.
Well, our men got right in, and then as soon as they saw they were surrounded, they just gave up. The white flags came up in white sheets, and I think there was something like 1,100 came out of that position.
The biggest battle for the Scheldt was on the island of Walcheren, and that was left up to the 2nd Div to do that.
For the Canadian 2nd Division, the Battle of the Scheldt required the clearing of the north shore of the estuary. The first stage required clearing the isthmus that connected South Beveland to the mainland.
There were 3 principal towns, Woensdrecht, Hoogerheide, and Ossendrecht. And there were like a triangle, and there was some vicious fighting went on there.
The key strategic point was the town of Woensdrecht, which had a hill that overlooked the entire isthmus. In order to advance into South Beveland, Woensdrecht had to be taken. That task was given to the Black Watch.
What's referred to as Black Friday. Friday the 13th of October, we were to make an attack on a dike that was actually part of a railroad embankment, and it was where it was crossed by a roadway on the bend. It was called Operation Angus, but it was a fluid situation because they had the protection of this great high embankment, and they could move around on the far side. For some reason, there was a delay, and the attack never went in until 6:30 in the morning instead of 5:30, which brought on considerably more light. And trying to make our way across the flats, and it was tragic. The flats were wide open. There wasn't a decent blade of grass to hide behind, and we suffered an awful lot of casualties there. And consequently, it didn't fail, but it didn't succeed too well.
The Black Watch had been decimated with an incredible number of casualties. The battle continued for Woensdrecht, and the Canadians overcame the German positions.
I think it was the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. They made an attack, and it was organized through other brigade regiments. And I believe the Typhoons come in and rocketed the positions, and that we overcome that position, and the Germans withdrew and went north toward Bergen-op-Zoom. And with that movement, we moved onto the neck of the peninsula, out onto toward the town of Goos.
The 2nd Division pushed across South Beveland into the capital city of Goos. The Germans were committed to a fighting retreat, backing into their final holdout, Walcheren Island. At the same time, other elements of the Canadian Army fought towards Bergen-op-Zoom to the north.
The condition of the people, we wouldn't believe. Even today, it can bring me to tears. Bad enough to watch the adults, but to see starving children is something else. So one of these guys took his mess tin and he started feeding one of them. Somebody else on the other side, he took his mess tin. Before you know it, there's a dozen kids around there. And our guy stopped eating, we were feeding the kids. We got the order to move on. We got a hold of a civilian that seemed to be in some kind of authority. Whatever food we had in the vehicle, we had surplus food. We left it at the side of the road. And his first thought was, we can't pay you. We're not selling.
The 2nd Division cleared South Beveland and moved on to face the last major German stronghold on the Scheldt, Walcheren Island. It was a highly fortified position with the shorelines covered by heavy guns, and the only approach by land was a causeway 12 kilometers long, yet only 40 meters wide. That thin strip of land would cost many Canadians their lives.
Well, the causeway was a beautiful, long, straight road right across to the island, and it was just like a shooting gallery. The Germans had an 88 lined up at the far end and a couple of smaller anti-aircraft guns, and they could fire straight down that causeway and ricochet them right off the roadway. While we were trying to get onto the causeway, we took a lot of casualties. We got pinned down, and then the Maisonneuve come up, and it was the Maisies that come up on the south side, and they drove through, and they got pretty well all the way across, and then got stopped at the far end. But in the meantime, British forces and our 3rd Division were coming in by sea from across from Belgium. And it was through the RAF and the landing of the British troops in our 3rd Division on the South Shore that actually took the island.
The Air Force bombed the dikes on Walcheren Island to flood the German positions. Then waterborne troops landed and attacked the isolated defenders. The German defenses collapsed, and the Battle of the Scheldt was over. It had been a very wet and uncomfortable month of fighting, with 6,367 Canadian casualties. It was a Canadian victory, key to the success of the war, and a feat for the nation to be proud of.
When they did get the Scheldt open, the first ship up the Scheldt was a Canadian that docked in Antwerp, and somebody from Holland and somebody from Belgium turned around to our commanders and asked whether there's no Canadians represented there.
We had effected the operation of the port, but nobody got invited to the party.
After the Battle of the Scheldt, the Canadian troops moved north to man the front lines for the winter. The British and Americans moved south to engage the Germans in Belgium and France. The war came to a standstill as both sides dug in along the Maas River. For the Canadians, it was a chance to reinforce the units and to replace those who had been killed or wounded. The Canadian front stretched from Dunkirk on the coast all the way to the Nijmegen salient on the German frontier.
But after the Scheldt, we moved up into around Nijmegen. By that time, winter was setting in.
We moved on up to Nijmegen to take over from the 82nd Airborne, U.S. Airborne, who had taken the Nijmegen Bridge.
They called it at the time the watch on the Moss. Nothing much happened.
You can't do a devil of a lot because there was a lot of wetlands near the area.
At one stage that they thought that we might be overrun, and we had to phone back every hour on the hour every night to say that we were still there And somehow or other I got the, or they wanted the same person to phone back each hour to make sure that, you know, some English-speaking German hadn't taken over our position. And, you know, for 6 or 7 weeks up there, I never slept more than about 40 minutes at a time.
If you had good binoculars, you could see across the valley about 500 yards. You can see some of the positions.
There was a chicken coop in the back end of our place. The door was on their side. We'd hear the Germans coming in to occupy the slit trench on their side. And then you'd hear the door of the chicken coop open. And the great commotion in the chicken coop. Way beyond, get out of that chicken coop. Leave those eggs alone. All kinds of silly stuff. And they just laughed.
We were issued no antifreeze. In that cold part of the winter, we had to get up, or, you know, the drivers had to start the tanks and the self-propelled vehicles, my impression, every hour, and run them for 5 or 10 minutes just to keep them from freezing.
At night, there would be a Jeep come up and bring a hot meal. And they would come up, and that Jeep come up a back road, a gravel road. Of course, it was all gravel, and come up and into our position, and with these big canisters of food, and the Germans never fired on it. And their food, their hot meal, come up on a three-wheel cart with a horse, and the man on the drive sitting up on it, and no one ever fired on him. It was an unwritten rule. You don't touch the man with the food.
At the time, you know, it was kind of a frightening thing. You know, you didn't dare move around except at night.
Nijmegen, we were given the job under the bridge down in the flats. Because the Germans, they didn't get to blow the bridge up, but they continually tried to. They got ropes on both sides of the bridge, and Harry and myself, they put us on this, you know, I thought I was going on a raft. I was up at the cottage, and pulled us out in the middle of the river, the Wall River, and tied it off both sides. And we just sat there all night. Everything was coming down the river. Didn't matter if it was a duck or a cigarette package. We just sat there popping all night. We don't know what we ever hit. But I mean, they never did blow that bridge.
We patrolled the dikes. We didn't do too much in the daytime.
Well, you try to find a place where, if there's an old house nearby that had a cellar in it, you'd use that to do your rest in, and the rest of the time you'd be in your trenches.
When we got home, I used to call it home, the mother would make us a cup of tea with rose petals, because the Germans had taken all their tea and everything else away from them.
This Dutch family, they had 3 children, very young ones. I walked into the kitchen, I handed the lady the house a hot loaf of bread. She broke down and cried. And the kids gathered around her. They didn't know what it was. White bread.
They were wonderful. They'd give you anything.
And we see what happened to the civilians, what the German army did to Holland. At home.